Okay, all right. All right. So, anyone want to start with anything?
Ronald, have you got anything to ask? Hi, Mary.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking for my
Okay. So, who'd like to start?
I have a question if you want to go.
Yep.
I was listening to Grant Mahoney, who frequently tours with Ian.
Yep.
And about 5 years ago, he had access to his scroll.
Yep.
So he immediately went to the back page to find out how it all ended. And it said he died at 82. So recently he got access again, went back to the back page, and it now says 130. So
Yeah.
he says he's been taking communion and doing bloodline, which is something similar to Liebuster, and lining up his frequency with whatever. So I was wondering if we should discard the idea of death completely, and because if we are going to walk up with God as Enoch walked, if it is possible for us.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't hear that question. It sounds a bit like underwater, and I just wondered if it's clarified.
The question was really about our scroll and communion and how we can affect our age and our transformation, basically. So yeah, what happens is, you know, if I think what he was saying was Grant Mahoney looked at his scroll a number of years ago and in
Yes, he said he died at 82.
Yeah, he saw that he died at 82, and then later on, now he's looked again and he sees that he dies at 120. I mean, if he keeps at it, hopefully he can not die at all, which would be the ideal. But in a sense, if our destiny can be, and we can be bringing from what was rather than what is, then we can see what will be changed. So if we're looking back to what was our destiny before sin, going back into what was, going back into the heart of God, into eternity, because we have access to go back into what was when we're in Him, then we can begin to see what we should be like from His perspective without sin. And that's what the high priest did every year. He took back the sin into what was, where Christ was slain before the foundation of the world, so that sin could be dealt with. It can be dealt with there. Then you bring it from the perspective of there is no sin into today. And then that actually enables what will be to come out of what was rather than just what is. So if we do that, then we can then begin to apply the body and blood of Jesus. We can apply the truth. We can engage. There are various places within our heart, dance floor, soaking room, which can actually have an effect to change the frequency of our body, to change what's within our DNA, the record of death within our DNA. The order of Melchizedek has no remembrance of genealogy, so there's a process of dealing with that which has resulted within our DNA because of generations. And as we're born again and the reality of the third light strand of DNA begins to change us, and we then actually embrace the image that God has of us, if you like, you know, it says that we're predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ. So it's always been God's desire that we would be changed into that image, so we would become like Him. And that's a process that if I use the word ascension, then that will sound very new agey, but in reality, it's what would have happened to Adam and Eve if they hadn't sinned. They were sinless, but they weren't perfect, and they would have gone through a process of transformation or transfiguration or metamorphosis to bring them into the fullness of what sonship is. And we can embrace that same process today, and we can embrace the revelation that God has of his image for us, and we can see that applied to us. And that can mean actually, the frequency that's contained within that record, within the DNA of God and in the voice of God, we can apply to us and to our physical bodies to change them. And so, again, I take communion every day. I apply that every day. I'm looking for my bones and marrow to be changed. So my marrow, which is the source of blood, I want that to be changed and not carry the wrong DNA. And literally, when you give someone a bone marrow transplant, they have different DNA in their blood than they do in their cells of their body. And so when we get our marrow transplanted, if you like, with the correct DNA, then it can then begin to transform and change our physical DNA so that we can begin to radiate glory from the inside. I believe Jesus' transfiguration was a sign of what can take place when we get the fullness of our spiritual inheritance brought into the present. And we will be able to radiate and shine from the inside, flowing out through. So it is a process. Our scroll is not fixed. It's not fate. We can cooperate or not cooperate, and it can change what will be. If we learn to understand being able to access the pathway, and that's the key. We need to understand the pathway that is into what was and bringing that into what will be. And the way I see it now, and particularly I think Ian describes it as a Hebrew thinking which is circular. The end meets the beginning, and you can see the end from the beginning from the end. I actually feel a better representation of that is the sign of the covenant, which is a figure of 8, or an infinity sign, which is an eternal, continuous pathway that you can stand in what was, which is where the cross is our place of access into what is in the middle of that figure, and you can look back into what was and walk back into what was, and then you walk and take that back through what is into what will be, and then you come back into what is, and it's a continual non-ending cycle. So I think that better represents the way of thinking about how you can engage the end from the beginning. Because it always, when it was a circle, I could never really sort of fathom it out, because it's like, oh, I'm standing here, well, I'm standing in the same place. Where actually, if you look at that, you're going into what was and bringing that into what is, and then coming back into what will be in that figure of 8, because that was the sign of covenant. You stood in the blood in the middle, and you exchanged things, and you walked that figure of 8 covenant in agreement. So I believe that that's the better way of looking at it, and that means that we can see what will be changed. It is not set. We have a part to play in creating our future as sons of God, in agreement with God, but it all comes down to our choice at the end of the day, because we've been given free will to choose whether we're going to follow the right path or the wrong one. And the more we follow the right path, the more our future will be aligned with that path. So, yeah.
Mike, have you ever led anyone through an activation like that, or ever done an activation on that with people? Wondering if that's a possibility.
What? Having done activations?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
What you're saying about back and then coming forward, you know, from the what was, from the what is, where we're shaping now into the what was. And
Yeah.
have you, is that something?
Yeah. I mean, I have done some activations with that. Obviously, you have to be at a place where you can be, well, you have to be able to access the timeline, if you like. So you either have to be on wisdom's heights where those places meet and where the way is, or you have to be in him around the ark where you're actually stepping into him, into his four faces. Therefore you have access to what was, because you're now in him, and it's not something you can just do. You have to be able to access the right place to engage it. You know, I think a lot of people want to engage the timeline to find out what things happened in the past so that they can understand them, which is fine. I mean, you know, I have done that, and I have gone back in time to see and observe certain things, so I could have a better understanding of them. I don't do that much anymore because I just don't feel I need to, but certainly I do engage in what was on a very regular basis, like every day, because I want what was for my day to be what is for my day, and that is a really important place to be, because that really means that I can fully embrace what I was before sin spoiled it, and see the picture of what I was before sin for my day, and then begin to outwork that. So I can live according to what it was without sin messing it up, you know. But you know, it's accessing, you know, in a sense, accessing the very thoughts of God about me in his heart, because I was formed in the womb of his heart when he had all the thoughts about me. And you know, you get that from Psalm 139, and then he wrote things down in a book, a scroll, that the days of my life are ordained. Well, if I'm not coming from where they are ordained, then they're affected by how I've lived in my life. So there may be wood, hay, and stubble on my scroll, rather than the gold, silver, and precious stones that were intended from God's perspective. So it's bringing them back into an alignment. So for me, that means that, you know, John 6 says that we can have everlasting life and that we can live forever. And so I'm willing to take the flesh and, you know, eat my flesh, drink my blood, to engage that and to experience that. You know, but you know, I have engaged and taken people and have gone back into what was, into the heart of God, and it's quite, you know, people have found it quite intense. You know, I've seen people look and see themselves as light beings, and you know, I've gone back beyond that to look into that, and it's like, you know, you see all the light that goes on within a brain when all the neurons are firing and everything is, there's just amazing electrical activity of sort of all these blue lights going off. That's what when I went further into the thoughts of God, that's what it felt like. It was just like being in these firing neurons of God's creativity that was all about me, that I could engage in. You know, would I say it's easy to access? If you can access the ark of his presence, and you can step into him rather than just look into him, which is another level of engagement, then you can certainly look back into what was. You know, I have accessed the heart of God from the Firestones. On one of the Firestones, there's a few other places that I've seen to have been able to go there and have been there, but that's the only place that I've been there which is somewhere that I can choose to go rather than something happening. You know, I've had experiences where those things have happened to me, sort of pretty much outside of my control, but when I've gone into some other places. But I've always been able to access what was from being in him around the ark and stepping into him and being in his name. Because I think, you know, when it says that we've been predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ, are we talking about that we're supposed to look like him physically? No, I don't think so. I think we're supposed to be like him as we were created in the image of God, but as he created us to be. You know, that's the key. It's how he created us to be, and that image of what he created us to be is contained within his DNA, because he contains the DNA of everybody effectively within his. And we can engage that image and that frequency so that it can be applied to our DNA and to our physical body to begin change. And I think it's awesome that someone can look at their scroll and see that they would have died at 82, and now they look and it's 120. Great, you know. And let's see that it will say no end. So there is no death day, you know. You know, because if there are some people who've been applying this for a long time and they're several hundred years old or more, then it's certainly been effective in the past. You know, those people separated themselves from the world to be able to do that, and lived in the desert and with the desert fathers, and were some of those that embraced that lifestyle of separation. But now they're alive and they look different, and they've been transformed and transfigured, and they're now translucent and able to radiate glory and cover themselves up so as not to freak people out. You know. But I think it's a pretty disciplined process that we need to be willing to go through. Okay. Okay. I mean, there's a couple of you are sort of saying that you've got no sound. Does that mean that you can't say anything or you can't hear anything? If you can't hear anything, it must be your computer settings. And if you can't say anything, also it must be your computer settings, because everyone else is actually hearing and can say. So check your settings up in the little gear icon at the top of the screen to see what is actually your microphone and what is actually your speakers. Because you know, it can't be something wrong with my system because everyone else is hearing. So check that out if you're having a problem being able to hear or speak. Anyway, so there we go. Okay, so anyone else got a question or something they want to share?
Maybe this is fitting to what you just was asked. If you engage in the arc, would you then engage in one of the phases, or would you engage in all of the phases at the same time? I did mostly that I engaged in one of the phases, which I felt drawn. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can do that. In a sense, when I've engaged the presence of God around the ark, and I sing his name and I speak his name, and the, you know, the Yod Hey Vav Hey, and that manifestation of a presence, when I first encountered that, it would often be a face that I would be drawn to. So most of it was the eagle to start with, and you know, then it went into the lion or whatever. In doing that, when I then practiced that some more, I actually found that the face of God is a, how I would describe it, as morphing, if you like. It just rotates, and it's like it's lion, ox, eagle, man, lion, ox, eagle, man, and you have to look if you want to look into one aspect. When you step into and you're inside that, because we're in him, and like we're in the name of Jesus, the Yod Hey Shin Vav Hey, representing that we're in the name of Jesus in that, then you can begin to look out from the perspective, and it's like you carry something of the government, because we're talking about government here when we're looking at the four faces of God. It's all about government. We're not talking about, you know, meeting Jesus or meeting the Father or engaging the Holy Spirit personally. We're talking about the aspects of their governmental roles, which is why you have the four faces. As you see the four living creatures which stand before the throne in the throne room of God. So then I get drawn to, when I'm there, when I've engaged what was, and I'm looking for what is my mandate for today, what am I authorized to do, am I seeing what the Father's doing, then often that I begin to look out or speak out from a particular perspective. So it may be a kingly perspective of bringing order. It could be an apostolic perspective or a prophetic. I'm less conscious of it being something that's separate from myself. So I'm just doing something in that place because it's who I am, rather than, okay, now I need to think about speaking from the position of a lion and the kingly authority. It's just like I'm operating in kingship, or I'm operating in prophetic or apostolic or priestly function, just because I know what I'm called to do. I don't think about it as much. The same would apply when I'm engaging my gateways. I no longer think of them in a separate way. It helped me to understand them when I did that originally. Now they just flow together. I don't think of, well, a reverence is touching my conscience. Reverence just flows. My spirit just engages. So everything becomes just who I am. And therefore I'm no longer having to think about who I am to try and deliberately function in that way, because I've done it so much. Now it's just normal to me to see me flowing from the inside out. So everything just becomes now just who I am. So I don't think of myself as spirit, soul, and body. I'm just me. I can engage heaven and be me here, because that I have the capacity to do that in the spiritual realm, in this natural realm with my soul. But I'm pretty much looking to be integrated and flowing from one to the other. It's just how I am. Where it's taken a lot of practice to get there, and a lot of practice was very much deliberately choosing to engage or think about those things, so that I could learn and so that I could engage and see it operate that way. But ultimately, it's so we're just us. How we were created to be originally. Spirit, soul, body, completely integrated and one, just as Father, Son, and Spirit are one. They all know each other totally, but they're different functions. There's different things that the Father does and that Jesus does and the Spirit does, but they're one. They know everything, but they have different outworkings. So my spirit, soul, and body have different functions, but they all work together. But that's something that becomes more clear when we're flowing from the inside and flowing from heaven from the inside, if you like. So yeah, how would I describe what you do at the beginning? As you mature, becomes more refined. Let's say when I first engaged the Ark of the Presence, it was all about the manna and the tablets and the rod, because I just wanted to know what my mandate was and go and do it. Then when I realized about the four faces of God and how to engage with the four faces of God, that's when it went to another level. And then when I went to engaging and stepping into that, it went to another level. And I think everything's a journey and a process that goes deeper. Deep is always calling us to deep, to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And when you get deeper and deeper, what you saw at a surface level, you experience something of a greater revelation or experience or understanding of it that outworks. And everything goes deeper. I mean, God is, to fathom the depths of God is an eternal task. but we get to start it now. And actually what we do with it now has a pretty major effect on, you know, what will be in the future. So it's important to try and pursue relationship and intimacy. So, yeah.
I was just thinking there about getting the body. I'm just thinking, you talked about spirit being, and can you hear me all right?
It's a little bit, you're a bit soft. So
okay. Yeah.
Not really, no. But go on, carry on.
I don't know how to. But I was just thinking about, if you get to the point where you began to recognise when you were in the flesh in a wrong way, because you were getting so accustomed to living in the Spirit and knowing that your body and mind were subject to the Spirit of God living within you, that you began to recognise when you were not living in the Spirit, when your flesh comes up and hits you. I kind of lost you now, Mike. So I'm just wondering, because occasionally it's like I drop out of the Spirit, if you understand what I mean, and suddenly find myself maybe in conflict or in misunderstanding or miscommunication that seems inexplicable, but it's actually because the flesh is operating. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely makes sense. We're in a journey, and I think in that process of transformation, going from deeper levels, dealing with soul and spirit. So that initial soul and spirit, that is the surface. What are my behaviors motivated by the soul? What are the spirit? And recognizing there are differences, and therefore understanding ourselves better. Then that goes deeper into the thoughts and intentions of the heart. So what actually motivates me to respond from my flesh rather than my spirit? Well, usually because there's an unmet need in my flesh that the spirit is not yet touched. So I've been used to looking from the outside world for that to be met. So having that met from the outside world, I have to see that changed. And in the process of that, we become more sensitive to those things. And it's like we have a choice every day of what pathway to follow. And we have a choice every day when we get a choice, if you like. Am I going to choose now? Just because in the beginning of the morning I chose to be a living sacrifice and present myself for God, doesn't mean that I don't have to make that choice every single time there's an opportunity, because I've always got free will, and yes, I might want to surrender my free will to God's will, and not your will, not my will but yours be done, and I can do that as a thing, but every time I still get the choice. And it's like Adam and Eve had no sin. They'd never made a choice which was negative before. So the flesh, in a sense, that capacity to choose, let's say the free will capacity, is always there. And so we always potentially have the capacity to choose the wrong path. And that pathway can be affected by that which is yet to be transformed. So memory, trauma, mindsets, belief systems, any of those things can be potential triggers, plus genetic triggers, because obviously the deepest level of transformation is what happens genetically. So if there are any seed line, bloodline, iniquitous things, familiar spirits attached to them, then they can bias our choice. And the way I sort of illustrated it with people in the past is, when you throw a bowling ball, it automatically turns to the left or the right, depending on whether you're throwing backhand or forehand in a bowling ball, because it has a bias in it. It has a weight that's on one side of it that always will cause it to go to that side. And so iniquity within us, or genetic triggers within us, are like that biased that will cause us to, in a sense, default to certain patterns of behavior or thinking or actions. You can get a bowling ball to go really straight. You have to throw it really hard, because sometimes they throw it up the middle to try and blast all the other bowling balls out of the way from the jack. So they throw it really hard and it'll go straight. But it's hard work, and you get weary and heavy laden trying to maintain that. So the thing is, remove the bias from the ball, then it will go straight. So we have to deal with those things which are the bias in our lives that do come up when we're faced with certain situations. And because God uses the trials and the tribulations and the troubles we face to show us where we are on our journey. I think most people think that, oh no, they're terrible things. They're not. When something comes up, it's a stepping stone to change and transformation. If I embrace it as, hey, God loves me, he corrects those he loves as children, because he's our father, and therefore he allows this situation so that it will show me, hey, I'm still thinking according to this old pattern. I'm still operating according to this, oh, why did I do that? And so I have a teaching within the transformation series, which is how we can evaluate our reactions. Was that reaction something that came out of a unmet need, an unresolved issue in our hearts, or was it directed by the Spirit? And we need to test those reactions. And I've used this a lot, because it's like, well, why did I react defensively in that situation? Well, it may have been because I was being attacked. If you're being attacked, often you need to defend. But in reality, it may just be that that's an area of woundedness that I've protected, and therefore, when anyone starts to behave or act or say things in that manner, I immediately come out of that area of woundedness that I'm protecting. So I learn to evaluate why I'm being defensive, why I'm being offensive, why I'm being fearful, why I backed off, why I was afraid to say something, why did I feel embarrassed, what was going on in my reactions to certain stimuli or situations that I need to use as a stimulus to change and transformation. I need to know that God loves me, accepts me, there's no guilt, shame, and condemnation, therefore I can accept and own those behaviors without any fear that it's going to do anything other than enhance my relationship with God. If I still operate out of fear, then I will run and hide in the bushes and try and cover it up, which is what the other pathway will always take us to. So, yeah, I would say anything that comes up like that is a great opportunity to be transformed if we embrace the opportunity. Every potential failure is an opportunity for success, because we learn from it. If we take it as a stepping stone, rather than, okay, I'm not getting up because I'm giving in because I'm a failure, the reality is, no, we may make mistakes and we may fail, but if we get up and use it as an opportunity to learn how to succeed, then we'll grow and we will mature through the circumstances of life. And who knows what triggers there are within our memory and our generational memory until we start seeing them come to the surface. So when we say things like, search us, O God, and know our hearts, try us and see if there's any anxious thoughts, see if there's any evil or wicked or iniquitous way in us, then we can sail through life just thinking that's me. Whereas when we realize that actually that's not who God created me to be, then we can receive the transformation that comes through embracing those and learning and running to God, walking in the light and receiving cleansing and change, because that's what they all do when we come and own it. And then we can use the courts to deal with an accusation. Well, why is this there? I need to find out what the root of it is, what gives the enemy legal right to bring this mindset. And it could be something we've done, it could be something someone's done to us, it could be something that's happened in our generational line that has made that an epigenetic trigger. You know, some people have no problem with alcohol for their whole lives until certain triggers of emotional situations come up, and all of a sudden they turn to alcohol to meet their needs. Why? Because they were genetic triggers. And there's many triggers like that within our DNA that we need to get resequenced out. And some of those are sickness triggers. Environmental situations turn on, and all of a sudden diabetes forms. Why? Because we actually ate too many of the wrong things that was an environmental stimulus for our genes to switch on that. If we'd been healthy, it may not have happened. So environmental things can switch genetic triggers for disease and sickness and other things. We just have to make sure that those things are removed and not operating in our DNA, so they're not going to be switched on. And the way to do that is to be totally ruthlessly honest. You know, we have a tool that we use with our rehabilitation center, which is called a Jaharis window, or Jaharis window. And it very much looks at different views of self: revealed self, hidden self, blind self, and there's 4. There's another window. And ultimately, there can be things that are in blind self that we cannot see, but God knows them. Now, you know, so ultimately we want to live in a completely open window where we are who we are, and that's who we are. But there's a process that needs to go through, and honesty and openness is one of those things. Shame and guilt, or the fear that if people know something about us that they will think differently about us, or that God will, is a powerful demotivator for being open and honest. And if we've been disappointed and let down by people's behavior in the past when we told them something and they used it against us, that can again produce a fear environment that stops us being open and honest again. A culture of honor is where we're deliberately willing to be open and honest in a sense of choice, to let people speak into our blind self areas without being offended or on the defense. And it's not easy. You know, it's not easy to hear the truth, even when it's spoken in love. It's harder to hear the truth when it's not spoken in love. But if we're willing to take that truth to God and seek Him, then even when people say nasty things in a nasty way that may have some grain of truth into it, then we're willing to receive that and change. You know, generally speaking, there's no smoke without fire. So somewhere something will produce that. So yeah, I would say that that's a good way, and it's okay for that to take place. It's not okay for it to continue to be taking place all the time, because once we recognize it, then we're responsible to deal with it. But we can, you know, that's the key. We have many tools, whether live busing or court system or repentance and renunciation, you know, deliverance, to set us free. If we're real and honest.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Okey-dokey. Anyone else want to ask something? Yep, no? We've got a few minutes left before I got to go on to my next call.
Mike, sorry, it's not in the hangout on the 5th of March that we did. When someone was asking you about the difference between the formal authority, which was relational, fulfilled and apostolic, compared to Melchizedek. One of the guys.
Yeah.
And I want a question about that, in the sense that if there is a current beneficiary or operating in authority that is there, how does one know? So it's removed through actually enemy activity. How do you then go about ensuring that there is some authority in that situation? I say removed; it was actually abrogated. The people involved stepped down, and so there is now nothing, particularly in that kind of measure, prophetic authority or apostolic, or even in the order of Melchizedek, remaining. And just wondering if you had any. There's a slight change of topic, but I'm just wondering if you're understanding what I'm asking, really.
In a sense, any place or region or town or whatever it might be has a blueprint assigned by God, and you need those people who embrace that blueprint to be able to release that blueprint and then see that released on the earth, and to release people to fill that blueprint as their destinies intersect. So God will have a blueprint for if people have stepped down from what they were doing previously and they didn't have a blueprint from heaven anyway, well, then they were only operating in this level of authority, which is not the order of Melchizedek anyway. So in a sense, it's not such a bad thing, because when there are people on the earth who have reputations and natural positions of government or church government or ministry government, or that they're recognized as having some level of authority, then people tend to succeed to that, if you like. And that can be a hindrance if those people are not equipping people and equipping the saints for service. And I think this is the big issue with all the fivefold ministry issues. If they are not equipping the saints to service, but are taking the place of and are representing the saints in service, then they're old order, and it's better that they were out of the way and removed. So better there be a vacuum that can be filled with people who are drawn into it, because God will draw them into that place of authority, than people in those places of authority who are operating under the wrong sort of government, because they will restrict people rather than release people. And God can call people into a place because he's calling people into government, and it's easier when people recognize that that old form of government is no longer there. So it may be that you'll find a lot of places and things where people start to step out of those places because God is actually doing that. Once that's taken place, if you know, I guess you're asking because you feel called to a particular area. So in a sense, if that's what you're seeing, then I would be saying to God, okay, what is the mandate? What's the blueprint? Show me. Because somebody has to take the lead and be willing to go and get the blueprint and be called into that place and take responsibility. And when others are stepping down, and some of those people who are stepping down may be well known and respected in earthly senses, but they may not be represented and recognized in heaven because they're not going there. Therefore, they're not going to get the fullness of a heavenly blueprint, because they're not actually operating in a heavenly royal priesthood that brings those blueprints and releases them onto the earth. And then you're then looking for the apostolic and prophetic part of the four faces of God, if you like, to establish the full word and the government of that word, to release that, so that the shadow of that blueprint can be filled as you release people. And the key is apostolic and prophetic of the order of Melchizedek will be foundations that people can stand on, and that those foundations will release those people into their destinies. apostolic prophetic after the fivefold ministry actually usually is over them as a covering, which will restrict them, not release them, because we're not supposed to be under anybody. I'm not talking about not having a right respect for authority, because I think there is a right respect of authority, but that is not for our lives. That is for any governmental sphere that a blueprint exists. So, you know, as a church, we have a governmental blueprint, and therefore the bench of 3 and the bench of 7 and our bench of 12 plus our 7 mountain benches have governmental authority for those areas, and therefore those people are there again to release people to outwork that. And I respect that government. I don't usurp the authority of those who are on the mountains, even within our blueprint, because I want to release them, not be over them, telling them what to do or trying to be doing their things. You know, so it's a complete inverse of what is normally seen. Because I love Bill Johnson's thing of it is, let our ceiling be the next generation's floor. Well, forget the next generation. Let my foundation be what people can build on. That's really, and what gets seen is what gets built, not the foundation. Who wants to see the foundations? They're already built, laid in the ground and covered. No one wants to see the foundations, but actually that's not very much kudos in that, is it? People want to see who's on top of the mountain. Well, actually, that is why we must do it the opposite way. And our attitude and in the sense of the humility is, I know who I am, I know my governmental authority, I don't need people to see it. I just need to release it and exercise it so people benefit from it and are then released to exercise their authority, because we all are under an open heaven and under God's authority within our lives. And I think where it went astray was probably this, scriptures which talk about, authority, submitting to authority and everything else. There's a right sense where there's a blueprint, and if you're part of that blueprint, then you submit to the blueprint. You submit to God's purpose and will in it. You don't submit your daily life. That is submitted to God, who gives you his mandate for your daily life. We're under God's government. I don't need to ask a church leader whether I can do something in my daily life, which I'm quite capable of doing. They don't have authority over how I live in that way, other than if it impinges on my behavior, actually brings disrepute to Christ, and there are certain things which we have to deal with in that. But actually, even that we deal with in a culture of honor that helps people deal with the problem and doesn't punish them. We don't punish people, we help bring blessing to them. So it's a totally different way of looking at things. But I would say it's a great place if it is less muddy, if you like, if people aren't doing things in this realm. It brings a much more freedom for things to be done in the heavenly realm, because then people will start looking for, well, what's God doing? And then they're more likely to hear the sound that's coming out of heaven that will resonate with them, that will draw them to follow what he's doing, rather than following a person.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, you're welcome.